Okay, welcome back. We are now in video number 7 of the Git Management XUI series. Since the last recording, it's actually been a couple of days, just other things going on, as well as trying to figure out a better way to present. I don't know if you remember, so I have done a couple of things in the XUI, just kind of learning some things for myself. There's no reason for anybody to see me poke through this stuff. So I'll cover that first. Then we'll kind of get into, we're starting to work with the blueprint synchronization process. So let's start by covering what's changed since our last video. So number one, I don't believe we had a root directory here. The other thing that I had added into my Git configurations was the ability to basically target a root directory. So inside of a Git repository, we might have a directory called, well, I don't want to set one up here. Actually, I'm going to change this one a little bit. Instead of newest, let's call it, just call it CloudBolt. And then I'm going to go into root directory, and I'm going to specify that this is going to be CloudBolt content. And what this will do is, as I build it out, but the thought process is as a CloudBolt user, I can not only target a repository and a branch, but also a directory inside of that repository. So I might have a multi-purpose repository that keeps other things like Terraform configs as part of under other subdirectories inside of the repo, but this will allow me to target a separate root directory. So that's going to be the root directory. It could also be a path here as well, but I'm going to leave it as just a directory for now. And let's go ahead and save that. Now, the other thing I'm not sure of is if this will update the name. So notice it left my newest configuration, so I'm going to need to figure out a way to actually delete the other ones when we're not using it. But for now, I have what I needed. It will overwrite if I were to add information to newest, but I didn't check to go back and figure out, this is being renamed, let's fix that. So we have CloudBolt now. Let's go ahead and showcase. I think you saw that. I think we had the edit functionality working earlier. The one big thing that I did after the last video is versus, I wanted to, this definitely shouldn't be inbound either, so I'm going to switch that to outbound. I did want to, I don't have a connection type showing up here. So my type isn't working either. So we'll fix that here as we go through this. Okay, so we have our information here. I was going to do a drop down that says after you select the Git connection, then go out and query the repo for that information. I've messed with it for an hour or two, and after struggling with it, I'm just going to allow, for now, for the first iteration, for the customer to type in the repo name as well as the branch. This will allow me to continue moving forward with the use case, and maybe that's some additional capability we can add back in later. It's just querying the repo, and then once we select the repo, query available branches, things along those lines. But for now, they're just text fields. It will work. Just switch that to outbound. Again. Okay, so now we have outbound. I'm actually going to, that's bugging me now, so I'm going to fix where that's at. So that's going to be in our page where we're displaying. So remember, we have one admin page that calls these different tabs. The other thing I did is I actually renamed tab blueprint to tab content. And I'll explain a little more about that here in a bit. But we now have our tab config. And the tab config is where we're pulling and creating those data, the data tables for each of the Git configs. You'll notice that I have config.config type, but I think one of the things you see down here in my my shell plus, I actually have config type none. So a lot of these are actually type outbound. What ended up happening is, as I was going through this, it's a bad idea to name anything type because type is a reserved keyword in Python. So a lot of times I was doing like type equals. We don't want to do that. So I changed this to config type, and I didn't update my configurations here. So let's actually go through and let's get configs again and see if our new config has that data stored appropriately. Here is here's our new connection. So it didn't actually store our config type appropriately. So I think that's telling me that we I missed something when we were saving in the form. So if we go over to our form, remember we have this Git Config form. The Git Config form has a save method associated with it. And this is what happens when you press the go button on the form, or the save button, or whatever it's labeled. You'll notice here we have, here's our issue, is that it's going to set up type, and type isn't relevant. So this is actually, instead of type, I think in our add or edit git config method in our utilities file, I think we're accepting things correctly. So see, we're config type here now, but we're not passing the right field from there. So if we head back over to forms, instead of type, we want this to now be, copy it. Nope. We want this to be config underscore type. So we're going to save that and paste our config type there. We can relabel it. You notice that it turned purple as soon as I didn't have any references to it in here. So we don't want anything in here called type. We don't want to reset that. That's a reserved method in Python. We don't want to reset that. That can cause some really funky behaviors that I've run into in the past. So everything should no longer be just type. It's now config underscore type. Let's go ahead and save all. I'm going to try and you need to restart Apache. So I'm going to restart HTTPD. Okay, so pause the video for a second and restart Apache and refresh the screen. I also deleted all the extra configurations. I don't really need them. They were just there for testing. So I do have still the none type here, but I'm going to edit it and just ensure that this gets set to inbound or outbound. And this should be functioning now. There we go. Now we can see that this is set to a type of outbound. And this is, again, the big idea. We want to be able to call outbound configs to synchronize to GitHub, but we also want to be able to set up an inbound config that can target a repository, a branch, and a directory. And based on a recurring job in CloudBolt, actually go out and parse that content and import any new content that exists in that catalog. Ingest it, create it in the targeting instance of CloudBolt that's set up to do those things. So that's kind of what we've done on this config page since the last call. The other couple of things that I've done is the blueprints page. You'll notice we now have an actions button here. So I've updated this a little bit. So as part of the actions button, let's just kind of walk through what's set up there. So like I'd mentioned, I did rename this from tab-blueprint to tab-content. And the reason that I did that is I don't want to have to, I could create a new tab-blueprints and a tab-recurring jobs and a tab-whatever other CloudBolt content we want to support, but I don't like repeating code. So what I did is I made this page templated so that we can pull in, and when we load these pages in our views file, actually let's start in views because that's kind of the first place this ends up getting called. Go up to our admin page where we're building our tabs out. I think it's towards the top. Okay, we can see now that I have a config context. So I'm creating a config context. Remember before we were just passing one single context into all of our tabs. We don't necessarily have to do that. We really only have to call the content that is applicable to what we're doing. So we have our config context. We also then have a blueprint context. So these are a little different. We're going to, instead of passing in, let's just pull this down so we can see both at the same time. Instead of passing in connection infos, git configs, and docs, we don't really care about those for the blueprint tab. So it's going to be rendered a little bit separately. One of those is formatting the blueprints for template. This goes through, I think it's actually in the views tab. Instead of just part of what this does is it will pass in all of our blueprints with the get all blueprints command, but it's going to format it to make it a little more user friendly. So when we see that there's a global ID in there, there's a label, there's a column one data. So if we jump back over to our UI, we can see that information here. We don't see the global ID yet, and you'll see that when we get into the action component, because we want to reference these elements by their global ID, not necessarily the name. Most elements in CloudBolt don't allow duplicate names, but some do. So just to prevent that, I like to use the global ID for those kinds of things because it's guaranteed unique across CloudBolt instances. Okay, so format blueprints for template, we're passing that into our blueprint context. We are then giving it that content label as part of what we're rendering in our tab-config page. So you can see, nope, tab-content. Those things are not necessarily working. Oh, here it is. So you'll notice that content label, that's passing this in here, and that's where we're getting CloudBolt blueprints at the top of this tab. So we're passing in blueprints, and then when we go to create another tab that's recurring jobs, it's going to end up being CloudBolt recurring jobs. We're going to pass it in because at the end of the day, it's just a template that's using different information that's passed in for these different resource types. Okay, so we're passing that information in. We're also passing in content type. And content type is important. This is the name of the model inside of the CloudBolt database. And the reason that we're doing this is because the methods that we're going to be building out here, hopefully in this video, if everything goes well, we're going to use the content type that's passed in as part of the method that we're calling to create or to export the content. So we will, based off of the global ID that we're passing into the contents, as well as the content type, those two things allow us to construct the information we need to pull the object from the database. So we'll get into this. We'll do service blueprint.objects.get, and then we'll do global ID equals whatever global ID we pass in here. So we're going to use that to figure out what blueprint we're trying to export, and then we're going to export it to GitHub. The other thing that I've allowed for here is to specify the column names. And notice this is a list that we're passing in. And this column name, what we're doing is we're actually looping through. I took the approach I took here, if I can recall what I did. Yeah, so I always want actions to be available on this form. So actions is a static header. We're not going to change that. We always want to, if we're doing this, we want each of these tabs to have the capability to export each of these resources that show up in our table. So there's always going to be an actions column. And you'll notice down here, we also have, there's no if statements around the action column, just the action column is static. It's always going to be there. But I do want to allow, as I get into this, I don't know what other columns I might want to display for other resource types. I do know that for blueprints, I want to display blueprint name and resource type. So those are my first two columns. I'm also, if you notice, yeah, so when I'm building out the data, when I'm formatting my blueprints for the template, I'm passing in, the first column will always be labeled. I think that's a pretty good standard for building these things out. For blueprints, it's going to be the blueprint name. It's going to be the label that users are going to see. So for a lot of the elements in CloudBolt have a database name, which is usually like Pythonic. It's all undercase with all lowercase with underscores between words. We're not going to show the database name. We're going to show the actual name for these resources, which is usually a more user-friendly kind of name. So that's what we're going to show in the label column. So every single one of these resources will always have a global ID and a label. And then after label, we can put in up to 4 different columns of additional data. Those 4 columns do have to match the number of columns after our first field. So first field's always label. Notice I only have 1 additional column, so I'm doing column _1 data. But what this allows me to do, building this dynamically like this, is I've built in everything I need to pass in additional elements with information about those elements moving forward in an intelligent and dynamic fashion. So notice we're building out these table rows. The first one is content.label, and then if content1 data, if content2, column 2 data, column 3, column 4 data, so on and so forth, it will add in those additional rows. So this template is now dynamic in nature. We can use it for multiple use cases, blueprints, recurring jobs, rules, any kind of content that we want to support as part of this plugin. So, or this XUI, I guess would be the appropriate term. So we've now passed those in, and you'll notice that I have this tab-content. I'm going to call this by just specifying lowercase content. The way that we build out these tabs with this tab group capability, we're looking for tab-, and then we strip the .html off. But we'll actually build this out on the fly and call the template that matches that based off of the kind of middle component, after the hyphen, before the .html. And I'm going to label that tab blueprints. and I'm going to pass in my blueprint context. When we go to do recurring jobs, I'm going to just change my label, and I'm going to build my recurring jobs context. I'm going to pass it in. And now we don't have to build another HTML template. I'm not an HTML guru by any means. I can do basic tables or labels or paragraphs, but that's about the content, the extent of it. I don't want to build out different templates for all of those. So this is now reusable. We can use it as we build other use cases. So let's talk a little bit about our form, though. So yeah, let's go back over to the tab content. So again, this HTML page, really this entire HTML page exists so that we can, number one, view everything, but number two, edit things from that page, or not edit things, but export content to GitHub. So this action here is the entire reason that this page exists. So we have this action that I've built out. The button, you'll notice we have that plus with an octagon. I'm using Font Awesome, so if you've ever used Font Awesome, you can go there and Google or just search through there for different shapes that you think might work well, place it into the same construct and see what that looks like for your environment. But here's the title for my button, which is create a new Git commit for CloudBolt. And you'll see if we jump over to the management page, I hover, it says create a new Git commit for CloudBolt. And notice it says blueprints there because, again, we're templated. We want anything that has to do with something that uses the resource type specifically to be templated. So it's going to take that content label again. Here's where the magic happens, though. When you click that button, effectively what it's going to do is it's going to call this URL from our URLs file, and we'll look at that in just a second. That URL is then going to pass in two parameters into it. One's going to be the content type. So that would be service blueprint in this instance. And the other one is global ID. So this is how we're passing that information into first a URL, but that URL effectively represents a method inside of our, actually I think it's technically a function in our views.py file. So let's go, we're going to go find our git commit create and figure out what view that's calling. So remember from our templates, if we're calling URLs, we can go to the urls.py. So we're going to go to urls.py. Here's our git commit create. You can see in here that both of these, because it's the global ID, notice I'm using the regex expression for a string and not for, where's another ID, that P \D plus. This is for an integer type of string. We're not going to use this for this ID because it's the global ID. It's an alphanumeric string, so we need to use the numeric string regex check here. So again, we're passing in two parameters. First one content type, second one content ID. Based off of that, we're going to invoke our create git commit method or function from our views file. So over to our views file, just kind of follow this down the chain a little bit. We have in here our create git config method. So this create git config method, first we start off by doing an action URL, and this is just, if I'm understanding this correctly, me setting this action URL and returning it with it tells this return how am I going to get to the URL for the action itself. And that's just to get, this is really just a loop because git config create is the URL method that we just looked at that brings us back to create git config. What that means is when we return, because the first request is not going to be a post, if you recall from earlier. So the post will return, and this is when post is when we press the submit button after we fill the information in. It's going to be a post request because we're trying to do something with the data. We're trying to store the data. So if we're not posting, that means this is the initial form load. So we need to tell the form what action URL we're going to use. And this is how we're telling it to go back to our urls.py, which comes back to create git config to submit this post request. It's kind of a roundabout ways to do it, but these are the examples that I've seen on how to do it. It works, and that's what I'm sticking with for now. So the other thing that I'm doing is I'm calling a form here. So I have this git config form. This is a new form that I've created. I don't have the save method for, actually I do, but it hasn't been built out correctly yet. But I have this form already built out. So that's kind of where I've left off and where we're going to pick up today. If you notice, if I go to edit this today, this is functioning. I've created a read-only field for service blueprint, a read-only field for content global ID. That way they can, as the user, they can see which content we're trying to synchronize. And then they can select a Git config. So the other thought that I had here is maybe we add in folder path. That might make this a little bit too long. So I'm undecided on that yet. For now, I'm going to leave it as the repo and the branch is some good information. I don't have a closing parentheses, which is going to drive me a little crazy. So I might add that in real quick. But yeah, so I can select the Git config that applies to this. Maybe it's dev or production or whatever we've called that Git config. And then I'm going to give it a Git comment. So I can put some comments around this content. And then the big idea is we want to take that service blueprint, all of the relative content, and place it into the Git repo. We want to do it under one individual commit. And when we press save, that's what should happen. Again, the plumbing isn't quite there yet, but that's what we're going to start building out here today. So thanks for sitting through that kind of quick 10, 15-minute update. Let's go ahead and start to dive into get things up and working. Now, first thing I am going to fix this real quick is just but let's look at our form and see what we have going on to figure out where that's at. So back over to our forms.py, you'll see that git commit form is a new form I've created. I do have a content type field, a content ID field, a git config field, and a git comment field. So you'll notice 3 of these are of the type character field. And the character field, if you recall, this is just a standard text input field. The way that I'm getting the data for those fields for the content type and for the content ID is I'm actually passing in, and now that I'm looking at this, I'm passing in an initial value into my git commit form when I load it. And I don't, oh, that's why I was showing the wrong, too many words that all sound really, really similar. Not git create, git config. Let's go to our git commit. There we go. That's why this wasn't working. Here's my create git commit. So this is the actual method we should be looking at. We are still building out our action URL. And you'll notice for this, we're still passing in our args. This is, we pass in args to a reverse. It's a list of positional based parameters that we're passing in. I think you might even be able to do like a quarks, but we're calling the git commit create. So that's how this gets loaded. I do have a couple of log statements just to be sure they're getting passed as expected. But then I'm creating my initial dictionary. That initial dictionary, so after the post, because remember, this is when we press submit, it ends up being, here's my initial. That's where I'm passing it in. So that's how these fields end up getting filled, is I'm passing that data in because I'm selecting, I'm on the page where we know that this resource type is the service blueprint or content type. I don't even remember what I called it at this point. It is a service blueprint. There you go, content type. It's a service blueprint and the content global ID. Because I clicked on it on this row, I know that the ID is the one that ends in VJK. But if I go to the next one, it's not going to end in VJK, it ends in F0E. So the button that we press is the one that tells us exactly. Actually, you can hover over the button and notice in the lower left-hand side, you can see the IDs there and it tells you the URL that we're trying to call. And that's where we go to our URLs file, which calls the views file, which loads our form. And then we can start to fill in the data as expected. So it's pulling all of that data in. We then are, so okay, over to our git commit form. So back to our form now that I've straightened that out and looked at the right function on the views module. So a couple of things that are going on here. I want all of these to be required. The other thing that I'm doing is there is a widget that's called text input that I can pass in a read only. As long as I have a value here, I could set this to read only. The user can't change it. I don't want them changing the service blueprint or the blueprint ID. So this makes those fields read only. They can view them, but they're not doing anything more with them. But then I'm giving them a set of choices from git configs. And I have a method called format git configs. And I don't know if that's in this file. or not. I believe it is. There it is. So format Git configs, and that's where I'm passing this in. Real quick before I forget, I'm going to put a closing parentheses there. It's syntax. It's not really functionality oriented, but while I'm here, that is what I want to do. Then I have a couple of things going in here. I do have. I actually copied this from another class, so I don't think I need this widget anymore. I'm going to get rid of it, then reload and make sure that the page is still working. This, I don't want to break that. Okay, Apache's restarted now. We're back at our blueprints page. I'm just going to test that action, make sure that it is still functioning. Yeah, still a little slow coming back up. So notice our parentheses there, and we're still getting our drop down. So we should be good to go. So back over to our form. We're going to come down. The clean method, again, I just kind of copied this from the other one. I'm not really doing a ton with this. I want to see where the self.clean data came from. I didn't really do anything with it. So again, the clean method is used primarily for validation of fields. So you can return errors if there's issues with them. This is already commented out, so I'm just going to clean this up a little bit while I'm here. I don't really care about the connection info name for this one either, so I'm just going to. I'm going to rely on the base class. And I'm going to do that a little. I want that, but I don't want this. Okay, so I'm using the base class by using the super to call the clean data. I'm not really doing anything here. I can do more. Maybe we get down the road if we want to. But then the last thing, this is really where we do the work with this action, is the save method. So I've already set this up to pull the relevant values from this when we go through and call save. So it's going to call it from save data, and this is where it's getting it from. It goes in and gets the clean data as we go through that process. And then the other thing, this is still red because I haven't gotten this yet, but what I want to do, I'm going to return the Git commit ID, and I can use that in my message that I present back to the users after they've saved this. So we have these 4 things. So Git commit ID. I'm not going to do the GitHub Copilot. It's just assuming what I want to do. I haven't created a method to do this yet, but really what I want to do, I'm going to take, and remember, I need to build this in a way that addresses multiple use cases, not just service blueprints, but also things like recurring jobs and other types like that. So I'm going to build a new method that I'm going to call, what are we doing here? We're doing a Git commit form. So we need to create a Git commit. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually create Git commit from content. And then we're going to pass in our content type, content ID. And then I guess I need all of these. So sure that's formatted appropriately, be on the 80 character limit. Not a hard requirement, but that's PEP 8 requirements for Python. It's just, I believe it's 80 characters on the line. So, and now I need to go create this method in my utilities file. Create it above my GitHub wrapper. Documentation in here. Actually, I do want to return. I'm not entirely sure here. I do have a couple of methods for commits already. I just want to make sure. Create or update file contents. This is for a single file. I don't know if you, I believe we covered this on a prior call. Delete file. Get repository content. Everything do a commit, so fix that. GitHub Copilot filled a lot of these out. Just do that. That's a little more. Get commit content. So we're back to our main method. Okay, now we're back to way too far. Okay, so we're back to our create get commit content method here. I'm going to content type, content ID, get config name, and get comment. So what do we want to do with all of these? Let's do. Let's first of all let's get our git config. So there we go. Get our git config. GitHub compiler. We can start to log in and grab our GitHub API wrapper. So this is already connected to GitHub at this point. So we're not worried about config type. I also want to make sure as I go through this, now that I'm thinking about it, before I forget, remember we had a method in our tabs for formatting. I want to make sure that I'm not showing them any inbound, because you don't want to be able to, you don't want to allow them to specify an inbound connection for synchronization. Well, formatted blueprints for template. No, that's not what I'm looking for. I need for our action button when we're building action button. So format blueprints for template. That's correct. So I need it in my forms. I need to ensure when I'm loading that format get configs. Okay, so in get configs, let's say if C config type equals only want to do this for outbound config types. We don't want to see inbound config types enough. So that should update that. So this way, when we go to our form, we're only going to see outbound config types here. So this won't show us any inbounds, where before I fix that, it could have potentially shown inbound Git configs as well. Okay, so back over to our utilities file, create Git commit from content. So we have our GitHub endpoint. We've gotten it from our Git config, so we have that. Let's get, what else do we need here? We need our repo equals GitHub repo. We need our branch. Root directory. So we're going to get our root directory as well. Let's see, what other information do we have in here? We don't need connection info because that's packaged in our GitHub wrapper. Good there. Big type we don't necessarily need. Those should be the main things that we need from the Git config. So we've gotten everything we need from our Git config. So we're just going to title this Git. So big. Okay, we have that. And what we want to do, get the content from CloudBolt. In content, we don't have a Git content yet, but we will. So that's a good. We'll leave this here as filler for now. The next thing we need to do. Let me think through this. So content. Really, what we're going to do is we're going to pull down all of the data. I believe there's a method that we can use to export CloudBolt content to the file system. So we're going to use that, maybe export it to a temp directory. We'll then parse that temp directory to build out the Git structure. We'll create our commit, then delete the content from the temp directory. So let's just kind of wireframe this in. We'll put the create. Should get content from CloudBolt. It's a good way to do that. So get content, we need to get the content from CloudBolt. Then we need to export the content in supported format to temp directory. I don't know what directory that's going to be yet. Actually, let me set that up now. If we want to go in somewhere in here. Not entirely sure that we want it we don't want it under our ProServe directory, I don't think, but let's see what we have. I'm going to leave this as is for now. We might change this, but we want to get the content. We want to return the temp directory to export content to the dir. Then we want to create the git commit. Then we want to delete the dir. Okay, so that's a decent wireframe to start. We'll start to build this out. So get the content from CloudBolt. This is kind of the first hurdle that we're gonna jump over here. So we have this export content to temp directory. So get the content from CloudBolt. So this is the first thing we need to do. We need to figure out what database object this is. I'm going to. There's two methods that I've used to do this before, but I always forget which one is which. Give me just a second. I'm going to poke through my other samples and just find what I'm looking for, and then we'll be right back. Okay, so I'm fairly certain that the method or function that I'm looking for is the eval capability in Python. So we're going to do this. Let's do eval, and we're going to create something called a function string, because that's really what we're trying to do, is dynamically create this function string on the fly based off of the information we already have about this. So we know our content type, right? So this is going to be, in this case, should be service.blueprint or service blueprint. It's the database type. And then we're going to do .objects.get ID, but we don't want ID. We want global ID. So this should build out the appropriate function that we're going to call. And then the eval, this allows us to, again, build that string dynamically, where we take the content that was passed in. That way we can reuse it for recurring jobs. We can reuse it for anything else that CloudBolt does. And it would allow us to get that content from this. So we have this, our eval string. We are going to store this as our content. So let's go ahead and we're going to use Shell Plus as a tool to build and evaluate that this works, because again, I'm only half sure that this is what we're looking for. Okay, so we're going to do content type equals service blueprint. We have our content type, and then we need to get a global ID for a blueprint. So content ID equals, we make our string. We're going to jump over to CloudBolt instance, and we have a couple of them here. I'm going to grab maybe fairly. Let's just do kind of our content library S3 bucket blueprint. So here's our global content ID. We're going to copy that and use it in Shell Plus. So we now have our content type and content ID. So we should be able to build out our function string. Just check before we use it. Our function string service blueprint.objects.get. Our global ID is that. Do I need, I don't believe I need a quotes around the global ID. Maybe I do. Let's find out. So BP is not defined, so that's interesting. What is BP? Oh, okay, so I do need quotes around it. So let's put quotes around string. And set that on the next one. There we go. Now we have our blueprint. So we have the blueprint that we're looking for. And again, this should work for other content types as well. We'll test. The one that I'm unsure of is a XUI. I think that we can still get XUIs as a single entity, but we'll have to test as we go through that. But we now have our content. We have the database object representing the content. The next thing we need to figure out is how do we export that content to the file system somewhere. So I'm going to pause for another second. I ran into some methods in the source code the other day that I think might help us with this, but I want to do a little bit of research, and we'll pick the recording back up here in just a few minutes. Okay, so we are back. We are going to work with some of the serializers that we have as part of our API. all things in CloudBolt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import my service blueprint serializer. I'm actually going to, let's do this. Let's do, I think what I'm going to do is take this a little different. We were, where were we? A whole bunch of stuff going on here and got sidetracked. Git commit from content and then export to temp directory. So here's where we're at here. What I do want to do here is I'm going to, because we're going to have different types of content and there are different serializers for each type of content that we have, I'm going to invoke the method for these dynamically. So kind of similar to what we did with the eval here, but I'm going to do, we'll do function, let's do serializer. Serializer call equals maybe export call. That's better. Equals string formatting. We're going to then go through and say export underscore we're going to use content type, but we're going to lowercase it. Content type lower, I believe. Lower. There we go. So it's going to give us all lowercase service blueprint. We're going to create a new method here in just a minute to use that. And then we're going to do dot. We're going to put parentheses around it, and we're going to pass in the appropriate variables. And we don't need, I don't think we need temp directory. We'll go through, that actually gets returned as part of our serializer. We'll run through what I did here in just a second, but that'll give us our directory here in a second. So I'm just going to pass in content type. And then we're going to do another eval. And the eval is going to, well, export call, but we're going to set this to our TMP directory equals, because that's part of what it's going to return is the directory where it was stored. So we don't even need to set that. We can determine maybe we don't want this to go to temp. By default, this method, the export to file system is unzipped files. We'll store it in the TMP directory. I think that's okay for now, and maybe we change that as things go on. So what this is going to need now is another method built called export underscore service blueprint. Maybe instead of service blueprint, I always prefer BP for this. I like to keep things short. I think that's pretty standard across the CloudBolt ecosystem. It's just the BP representation of the blueprint. So we have we actually, we want our content getting passed, and we don't care about the content type here. We want content itself getting passed in, because the content is the blueprint. So that's going to go in here, use our export service blueprint. We're going to do our import first we don't need to initialize this serializer unless we are exporting a blueprint, something that's of the type blueprint. So we're going to keep it under this function. From here, we don't need service blueprint imported, but we have the API serializer. Next thing we need to do is instantiate the serializer. We now have our serializer. Then going down the line, once we get it, we have our blueprint object already, so we don't need to get that. Then we just can take our serializer and export it to the file system as unzipped files. Maybe, I don't know that we have an option to change the name of this. which should be okay. I mean, the blueprint that gets placed there is always going to be the blueprint that we're working on. It's going to be the name of the blueprint, which I think is okay. Now, what I didn't like about this is it doesn't export names to file systems. The file name. Do this real quick. I think there may still be a little bit to do here. This takes care of the lion's share of the work. So let's show what I had worked on. So again, we're doing our import. We're importing that serializer. We're then instantiating the serializer, and then on the serializer, we're getting our blueprint. We're then passing it into export to file system as unzipped files. Now I'm jumping into a separate terminal where I'm actually in the folder here, but you'll notice this blueprint was called a CloudBolt intro with spaces in there. I don't like that at all whatsoever. This directory name, we have a lot of, there's a possibility to reuse some of the code that we already have for our content library for this. In our content library, the way that we're storing that code is it's taken and put into underscore case, the Pythonic kind of format. So this should be a_CloudBolt_intro for when we store it in Git. But that's not the way that this is happening today. So we can do one of two things. Either I can look to see if there's a different export method that doesn't store them as that, or what I can do is just maybe reach out to the file system and move the files to something that's a little more Pythonic. I'm thinking that what I may do though is we can leave it as this directory here. But what I'll do is as we're parsing the files and making our Git commits and creating our Git tree, we'll change this case at that point before we make our commit. So I think that'll be okay. But we now have this. So really cool. If we're in this directory now, we can do an ls. You can see we have our JSON file. CloudBolt intro. Zip. Metadata.json, that's what we're looking for. There's our metadata. I think the challenge that we're going to hit here, though, is that this is an older version. The service blueprint, I think, was the last one that was on v2 for the export capability. I think that it's fixed in the version that I'm running. I don't recall, so I may ping someone real quick just to figure that out. We do want it to be on v3. If it's not on v3, what ends up happening is it's going to change in the next release of CloudBolt. It's very, very close to being released. It hasn't been released yet. I'm not sure if this is it, so I'm going to do a little bit of research here, and we'll be back with you. Okay, so we're back. Figured out the issue. There were two issues. Number one, there's an additional input for that. There's a couple of inputs, but the other relative one was this include zip. If you'll recall on the a CloudBolt intro, there was a .zip file in there. We don't want a zip file. I just want the pure Python files or any JSON configuration. You'll see why when we get to the import portion, but effectively we just need the unzipped files so that we can put them all into Git. So the include zip equals false has been added in here. Also, the CloudBolt intro blueprint is an empty blueprint. There's no build items. There's nothing else included in there, which is why it looked like it was just a directory with 3 different things in there. I just reran this with a different, our AWS S3 bucket blueprint from the content library. And if we come in and take a look here, we'll now see that there's a lot more information in here. We're getting the icon for the blueprint. We get the metadata, JSON file, all of the different directories that should be associated with this. So they all exist now. They're there on the file system. And I believe, let's just check this metadata JSON file. See if they'll let me do that. There we go. Okay, so we have all of our configuration information in here. What I wanted to be sure of, though, is you'll notice the action name. If we get into so the action name S3 bucket create service, we should see that here in a minute. I'm also going to just scroll down a little further. Management actions, there should be a list objects and a delete object. One here. And then parameters, I'm not going to deal with those here. Resource type, teardown items. So we should also see S3 bucket delete service. So I think we should see 4. Here's our list objects. Here's our delete object. Oh, discovery item. I did not look at the discovery items in that config file either, but here's all of the content for this. So we have a build item. This is our deployment item 1. We have a discovery item. We have 2 day 2 actions, the list and delete objects, and then we have a teardown item. So I'm just going to check out the deployment item real quick, make sure this looks the way that we need it to be. Yep, so there we go. What we're looking for is the Python file and the metadata JSON that describes that action. So they're all here. We're good to go. So now we have a functional example of exporting this content directly to the file system in CloudBolt. We are then capturing the temp directory. So the temp directory, let me be sure, the one thing I didn't capture here. Yeah, so it is showing here. So this is the actual directory itself. So we're going to want to delete that entire directory when all is said and done. We'll get there. We're not there quite yet. Actually, you know what we can do? Let's go ahead and do temp directory is what we're capturing here. And we're going to say build a method to do that. Well, I don't know what shutil is, but I'm going to just we perform a high-level file operation. Getting a new file, archiving it, copy content one file to another. Well, let's see. Let's test this. This was all GitHub Copilot telling me that's what it should be. So I'm going to actually do temp tmp_dir equals. There's my tmp_dir. And then what this is telling me is I can do this. Let's give it a shot. And then let's see if S3 bucket is still there. I don't believe so, but let's see. Yeah, S3 bucket's going. So that does exactly what we're looking to do. I'm just going to import this locally. Again, if we're not deleting a temp directory for whatever reason, we don't necessarily need to have that as part of our imports. So I'm going to keep that as part of this function. I don't think we'll use this anywhere else. So now we have our get the content from CloudBolt. We're going to delete the temp directory when all is said and done. And then the last part is we need to commit this to GitHub. So git commit from content. This is telling me commit ID. Create commit from directory. Okay, so this, I think that's a good title for our next method. Let's see what it thinks we need here. So we have temp directory. Yes, we have to do that on our own. Okay, so we have our temp directory. Do we need repo branch? I think we do, and I actually think since we're not doing anything with GitHub here, I may pull all of this information. I'm going to continue to get the git config. Actually, you know what? I can just pass the git config right on into. Let's pass our git config here. Let's clean this action up a little bit because we really don't care about GitHub except for in this sub method that we're going to build out just now. Let me see, how do I want to do that? I don't want this to be, so right now this is called on the GitHub object itself. I don't want to do that yet. I am going to add some additional methods to the GitHub wrapper, but I don't want everything to be on the GitHub wrapper. I think we want some of this function outside of the wrapper, and we're going to use that to call wrapper-oriented methods directly. So let's build this out. Okay, so create commit from directory. We are going to look for the temp directory and the git config. And here is where I think it's appropriate to go ahead and load that information. So we have our git config, but we'll get all of the rest of this data. Okay, now, nope, we're not going to do that yet. Okay. Okay, so there's a couple of steps here, and I'm gonna full transparency here. I am pulling this from a blog article. So this is just to push multiple files on a single commit through GitHub API. If you wanted to actually get to the article, you can pause the video here and pull the URL from the video. Anyway, effectively what we're doing here is we're going to follow this process. So we're going to, first of all, we need to get the SHA of the branch. I've already built a method into the GitHub wrapper class for that. We'll show that in just a minute. We then need to create a blob for every single file that we're going to create. We're then going to create a tree from those blobs that specifies the file structure. And then we're going to create our commit. And the commit, what we're including with commit is our tree. Yeah, so we're going to follow this process, and I'm just using this article as kind of a reference for these things. But like I mentioned, as part of the GitHub wrapper, I already have git branch SHA. So that kind of first step, we're already doing that. Git branch is another method I had created. Create blob was another one that we're doing where we're just going to pass in content. We're going to include the repo full name. We're going to pass in that content in UTF-8 formatting and return the SHA when we create this. That is then going to be, I'm going to pull that as part of the create tree method, where that's kind of what we're going to start building out here. So create tree. We're going to, let me just show this. This is what the payload for the tree should look like. So first of all, we need to pass in a base tree. We need to pass in the tree itself. Let me actually show you the GitHub documentation for this too, where the create a tree is looking for a couple of things, but really I think the two big things, again, base tree and the tree, the new tree. So the base tree is where do you want to start inside of the repo? And what I want to do for this is I want to target our, I don't know if we'll be able to do it with the base directory. Either way, we'll build out the tree dynamically as we go through this. But what I really wanted to show is the format of these, each object in the tree should be this. One is these two are going to be static. It's going to be the same mode for this. 1000644 is the file mode for blobs. So every single file that we're going to support in this initial iteration is going to be a file type. We're then going to pass in the path for each of these, built off of the structure that we see inside of our temp directory. So we're going to read that temp directory and build corresponding blobs for each of those files, package it all up into one nice neat tree package, and submit it all as part of one REST call over to GitHub to create that commit. So yeah, so we're going to go through and build this out. So really, tree, base tree, I think are the only two inputs that we need. You'll notice owner, repo, we still need those, but we're using that as the get full path. I'm kind of putting those two pieces together. That's really all we need. Tree and base tree should be the two things that we need. So let's go over to here, create tree. And when we're creating tree, we're going to need the repo full name. Base tree SHA, path and blob SHA. I don't know if that's correct. Now I'm going to pass in trees. So our base tree, we do want the SHA for the base tree. We're going to have to get that. Build something to get that yet? I did not. So we'll build a function to get that here in just a minute. But let's start to build this out. I don't want blob SHA. Trees are going to be a list of dictionary entries. Anything repo. SHA the base tree, and then a list of trees to create. So is it trees or tree? Tree. It's the tree. Trees. Tree. A list of dictionary entries just to verify. List dictionary entries. So that's what we're looking for is the tree, and that's going to build out our formatted our format. So okay, so let's go through. We have just verify this with our documentation. Repos, owner repo, get trees. So that is correct. That's the URL that we're going to post against. And then we're going to create our data object, which is going to be our base tree and close. And then we're going to return, do we want to return that SHA from this? Do we want the entire tree? I don't know what we need in the next step, and that's going to be the key here. If we just need the SHA, then that's perfectly fine. So let's go back up to our primary diagram. We're going to create our tree, and then we're going to SHA branch. So we need the SHA from the branch. Then we go to our git commits. So we're going to create a commit, and our tree is going to include the SHA of the tree. So we really just need the SHA. I don't know what the parent's SHA is. I assume that parents. Let's go over to our git commits in here. See list, that doesn't help me. So this branches for head. pull requests, get a commit, pair two commits. Don't really care about any of these. Let's check to see what we're seeing in here. Add a commit. It commits. So tree, you'll notice this is okay, so parents are C34, that's SHA. I believe this is our tree SHA, so I have to recreate that. We should get a SHA back, but our parent SHA is up a little bit further, 3C4, 414C. Okay, that's the right one. This is our base tree. So we're gonna use the base tree as well as the tree SHA, pass those into our commit. Message is the other thing that we're going to need here. So let's build that out real quick. Our base trees, we're going to get our SHA back. So we're going to create our tree here. We're then going to create a commit, which includes the repo full name message, tree SHA, current SHA. Make sure this matches. Just again, GitHub Copilot is getting a lot better, but it's still not 100%. So our user repo get commits is correct. Then we need message, tree, and parents. Message, tree, and parents. Parents is actually passed in as a list, so perfect. That's fantastic. And then we get our tree SHA. So this should be exactly what we need from this. This page. So we have our create tree method now. We have our create commit method. We then have a patch. Oh no. Let's see what happens after add a commit. So once a commit exists, doing the ref from where we pulled the SHA under parents. In my case, since the ref was main, I'll update it. Make a request for the following endpoint. I'm going to leave this. It looks like this is just taking your branch and updating it. So I'm going to leave that for now. The last method I need to do get SHA for branch. So def get free SHA for branch. Need a repo full name branch. Let's see. So our get branch the same as, I think I did this just a minute ago. So if I do, I don't have GitHub anymore. I should GitHub equals. Now we have GitHub. Actually, I'm going to exit this because I can use the latest code that I have in here. Make sure this is saved. Again, reloading Shell Plus just allows us to take advantage of the new methods that we've put in here. Shell Plus only loads modules at the time of initial launch. Back to the GitHub wrapper. And we now have GitHub. And let's do branch equals. Yep. We also need a branch. Okay, so we have those two. Now we can do each get branch. Oh, there's my branch SHA. Let's just do that. That's all I really care about. Okay, there's my SHA. And the next thing I want to do, so I don't tree sheet. It's not. I want tree SHA. I want to make sure if this branch SHA is exactly what we need, then I think we're good to go. But I think the tree might be a little different. So if we go into GitHub.git, actually, let's build our URL first. URL equals tree. Create tree. Here's our trees URL, and I believe there's our URL. And then if I do, actually, I do URL slash branch. I think this gives us it'll give us the return for the branch, and then we can get to the SHA from there. So let's do github.git URL. Let's scroll up and see. So there's the whole tree, but here's the tree for our branch. Here's our SHA. So the branch SHA is the same as the tree SHA. I don't know if that's always the case, but I think that's an okay assumption to make. So we're going to leave this for now. We're going to use the git SHA for branch. And we're going to do that with we're going to call that outside of we're going to use the wrapper to facilitate all of the calls to GitHub. I don't know that I necessarily want to, I guess. I do want to pass all of this. I'm going to create a function outside of the class. I think it makes sense because we're working with file objects, but also GitHub objects. I don't want to mix the two. So I'll leave all of the, I'll leave everything in the place where I think it makes the most sense. So, so we're creating trees, we're creating commits. I think that we're good to go here. The next thing that we want to do is, though, go back up to create commit from directory. So we have our directory. We have our all of this. So we're going to create a pretty big loop in here. I'm going to do, here's my branch SHA equals GitHub get branch SHA. So we'll have our branch SHA now for our tree. So again, I'm going to pull up my diagram in my other window here. First thing actually we need to do is create our blobs. We'll get there though. And as we create our blobs, we'll build our tree out. So the tree, if you recall, is a list. So we're going to do tree equals empty list. We'll add to this as we get there. We're going to need our branch SHA eventually. We're going to have to create our blobs. We'll do that. Actually, you know what? For tree, I'm not going to build an empty list. I'm going to create another sub method. I'm not going to do it under GitHub because, again, I'm reading files here. So I'm going to take what it gives me, and I'm just going to get rid of the GitHub part. I'm going to create tree from directory, create a new method right below, or function right below it. equals, there's my empty list, and then we're going to return it when we're all done building it out. So we're just going to leave that there as filler for now, but we have our tree. We're going to create our tree from directory. And the tree is going to create all of our blobs. Go ahead, and I think I have a create blob. Create blob. We're also going to pass GitHub into here. There's our GitHub wrapper. We'll just use that, pass it in and through. Actually, GitHub's. So that way we know what it is. There's my GitHub object. And we're going to do GitHub create blob. We need our repo in here. I don't know that the blob needs, I don't think when we create a blob, because it's a function of a repository, but I don't think it's linked to a branch until you make the commit. I think it's kind of a standalone, could be way off here. My contents. This is Git database. So our blobs, about Git blobs, binary large object. It's the object type used to store contents of each file in a repo. Create a blob. I don't see any path for branch here, so it doesn't accept a branch as we're creating a blob, because I believe that has to do with the commit portion. So I think we're safe there. We don't need to pass a branch into this. But for the file content, really what we're going to do is we're going to do let's just GitHub Copilot. Let's make this easy. Okay, so we have our tree. Let's do an os.walk. We haven't imported OS yet, so we're going to do that. Let's import OS. So let's do that, and we're going to do this in Shell Plus first. I have no idea what this looks like, but tnp -r equals. And I think we've gotten rid of that one. So Jenkins failed halfway through, so I'm actually going to re-export our S3 bucket blueprint. Let's do from VP_ serializer equals and VP equals. That should be our S3 bucket blueprint. VP_ serializer. Export it again. Should have been, so we have our temp AWS S3 bucket again, and we have our temp dir. Just check again. We have our temp directory set to the directory it's in. If we come over to our other terminal, we can list this out and see that it does in fact exist. So we have our temp directory. So now if we go through and do we can do this. Let's find out. See if it complains. Too many values to unpack. Affected 3. This is right along the lines of what we want to do. Almost. We do need our root directory. Oh, file path. Okay. It's doing it for us. I don't think we want to replace. So this is really, really close. I just don't know about the os.walk. Let's do this. We're going to do second. We're going to log in and try and get actually, you know what? Let's do this. I have a experimental GitHub Copilot one that I can use. It's not GitHub Copilot. ChatGPT that I'm going to use here real quick. So let's do this. I'm going to go write a function that lists all of the files in their paths in the directory. All directories. Let's see what happens. I'll be working just a second. So maybe while we're waiting for that, try a different mechanism. Pause while we're waiting. Okay, so we're gonna give this a shot. So ChatGPT said to give this. So os.lister, that looked a little more familiar to me. So we're gonna give that a shot. So just back over here. And then this is going to be PNP directory. Okay, so let's see. Now it's not giving me all subdirectories, which is not helpful. So let's go back to ChatGPT. Oh, that's walk. That's interesting. Okay, it's telling me the same thing again. So I may. Okay, let's give that another shot then. Let's back to OS walk. I'm actually gonna, instead of, I'm just gonna print the file. Okay. That's not helpful. It's still not giving me the path. Oh, that's why. Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to see. So this is the full path to every element inside of there. So this, so far, we're looking good. We have our file path. That should get us to be able to get to our file. We will need the content from the file, so let's just verify that this does work. Okay, we're back. Sorry, I had to step away for a second. We are going to wrap up this create tree from directory method, and then we're going to kind of pull this section to a close. I think we'll be going for an hour and a half, 2 hours at this point. So create tree from directory, we are going to then read the file content. So if we go through and remember we did here, we're going to set temp directory, we're going to set import OS. TMP dir equals, and then we are going to go through, print those again, verify it's still working. And I'm going to set. Actually, do I still have file path? Okay, so I have a file path. That'll work. I just want to make sure that I'm able to read that content and capture it. As long as I have the file content, I think we're good. There we go. There's our file content for the S3 blueprint. Instead of, let's see what this does. So root directory, if you recall, we have a directory in CloudBolt. In my configuration, I think it was like CloudBolt _ content or something like that. We want to prepend all of our files with that. And I think that this would make sense. I'm going to say not file path, I'm going to say get file path, because it's not, we don't want to replace this is the actual file path, right? We want to say that this is the file path for Git. So if we have our temp directory as our root directory, let's say root directory equals CloudBolt content, and we have to fixed string. We can then come in and say that our Git file path is that. So let's check our Git file path. Perfect. And that's what we should see, because this is going to be now the absolute path in our Git repo all the way down to the content that we're creating. So let's see, we have our tree. We're then going to append a dictionary element to our tree that includes our file content as well as our Git file path. Remember, mode and type will always be that type of mode and that type of blob. And then we're going to do GitHub create blob. Just a second. I don't think this is quite right. We need our path, we need our content. No, we don't need our content. We need to create the blob, and then we need to add the blob to the tree and create the tree, then append the tree to the path. We haven't created our blob yet, so we're going to do GitHub create blob. We're going to do blob SHA equals, because if you recall from create blob, we should be returning the SHA. Yep, so we're returning the SHA from the blob creation. Here's our blob SHA, and then path, I think we do need, I don't think content is that. I think content actually ends up being the SHA itself. But let's verify. Okay, so get blobs path. Whoops, 04000. SHA for base tree. We don't care about 0400. That's okay. I'm not down far enough. Here we go. Here's our tree. The tree is taking in the SHA. We don't care about content. We want the SHA. So that's where Copilot can get you in trouble if you're not checking this as you go through. But now we're creating our blob. We're then appending the object that represents that file and the file path and the SHA. We're appending it to the tree. So now we have our tree. We should loop through all of our files and all of our directories and get our tree from that. So I'm going to save this here. I'm going to exit out of Shell Plus. Actually, before I do this, I want to make sure we have the full capability in place. So I think we're getting our tree, the create tree from directory. There's our tree. The last thing we're going to do, so at least maybe close the last thing though, we're going to come in and we're going to actually create the commit. So we haven't done that. Here we go. So it's already trying to go in and create the commit. So github.create commit. We got to pass in, let me just make sure this matches our inputs for create commit, repo full name, message, tree SHA, parent SHA. Okay, repo. This isn't right. That's why you double check. I'm just going to copy this. I think that makes sense. Keep things straight. Paste it down below. Okay, so repo full name, we have that here. Branch SHA is not correct. So we actually need our message, and I haven't passed that in yet, but we're capturing the Git comment here, and that's our message. So we're going to pass our Git comment in here. We're going to include that as part of the pass into Git commit. Isn't this like this? I'm not done with it yet. Oh, I haven't written it, so. And then we're going to take that Git comment that we just passed in, and we're going to pass it into the message parameter here. We then have our tree SHA, which is the branch SHA, that's correct. And then our parent SHA. Hold on, do we pass? Is it the tree SHA? Actually, the branch SHA, I think, ends up being the parent SHA. The tree SHA, I don't know, do we need to pass in the tree object itself? I thought we did for the commit. Add a commit. Nope, it's just the SHA for the tree. So we're creating that tree object. We don't want to return the tree. We do want to create the tree here. So we did not do that yet. So tree.append. So after we've created our tree objects here, we do want to do, let's do, create tree. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to pass this all in, and then we are returning the SHA from the tree. We don't need stuff. We do have the repo here. Okay, let's see. Our base tree SHA is going to be, we'll need our branch SHA passed in here as well. So that's our branch SHA. Okay, so that's our branch SHA. We have our repo getting passed in. We have our branch SHA, and then we created our tree here. The tree, we're using our temp directory because we're looping through it, and our root directory is the new file path that we're creating inside of our repository. So this should create the tree, but then I need to, let's return this because this includes the SHA with it. And then when we get this back, create tree from directory, we're getting the tree SHA. And again, remember a repo full name. So repo git comment tree SHA. So this is going to be my tree SHA. And then my parent SHA, which is going to be my branch SHA. That should do the trick. Let's see. We want to make sure we commit from directory. No, create commit. I want to make sure I'm getting the commit ID back because I'm going to be using that elsewhere. Create commit. Do I want the SHA or do I want the commit ID? I think they may be a little different. Let's just take a look at the documentation real quick. Again, trying to bring this into the landing, but we're on a roll. Okay, so get database trees. Here's my trees. Let's see, create a tree. We'll just look at our payload here. So it does return a SHA. But that's for the tree. So we've created the tree. We're getting the SHA from the tree, and then we're going to create a commit. And a commit should return this. Actually, you know what? I may return the URL for the commit. I think that just makes a little more sense in this case because then but basically we're using the commit ID to show back as part of the UI. This is what was created. So I'm going to use the URL instead of the commit ID. So we're going to return URL. Okay, create commit. This is our commit URL. We're going to return the commit URL. We don't need any of the splits or anything. I want that going out as it is. Okay, this looks a little better formatted. So I should, assuming this has all been done correct, and this is where debugging really comes in. I'm going to refresh this. I should be able to, now that I've created all of this, I should be able to call this create git commit from content. As long as I have these input parameters and have it loop through that directory, create my trees and my commits. I'm expecting that the first run through this will blow up in my face, but we're going to try this at least one more time. If it's failing, we'll probably pause and then pick this back up on the next video. But let's go ahead and get started. So content type equals. So remember, this is our service. Loop right. The up arrow. That's the right way to do it. And then content ID equals. There we go. And then Git Config name. I don't think I have that yet. Equals CloudBolt, I believe. And then Git comment equals testing CloudBolt Git management. Okay, so we should have all the inputs we need, and we're going to do from GUI.Git management utilities create Git comment commit from content. And we're going to pass in content type, pass in content ID, pass in Git config name, pass in Git comment, and cross our fingers. Let's see how this goes. Invalid syntax. Okay. Oh, I see what I did. That was really wrong. Got to import first, then you can call it. Okay. So here's, and I ran into this earlier, but notice I didn't put parentheses around my second eval statement. I did it with the first one. So we have our temp directory. Export service blueprint. I did not pass that in correctly. So where's my eval? Put some quotes around that. Be done with that. My other eval, I have quotes around it already. Let me go ahead and file, save all, cancel out of this, reload. Well, that's not right. Syntax had an extra period in there as well. So it wasn't just the quotation mark. Hold on a second. Oh, so the quotation marks I did not need because I'm passing an object and not a piece of not text. It was the period that I had an issue with. If we go back up, we should see it choked on the period, not the quote. It choked on the quote right after the period, or the parentheses right after the period. So that's the issue. Same thing, still in the parentheses. So get rid of the quotes, remove the period, save it, reload it, try it hopefully one last time, and we'll be on our way. Okay, so this is going to, here's where it gets a little tricky. How can I do that? Actually, you know what I can do is I can do one long eval string. Let's do this. So we're gonna call this. So notice what it's doing is it's not because the eval it's building a string here. The string's never, because it's building a string, it's not going to pass the content in here. And then we're evaluating the string. But what we want to do is I can take and I can nest this service blueprint.object.get inside of here, and then we're effectively having one long string call. So I'm going to get rid of this content. I don't care about content anymore. I do care about function string, because that should get me my object as we evaluate this statement. So let's, again, hopefully this, sometimes the eval statement can be a little temperamental. So we're just going to try this one more time, see if we can get it functioning. Okay, so we got further. That's a start. Missing one. Let's see. Create tree from directories. Missing branch SHA. Let's see. Tree. Directory. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, you know what? I did miss one. I did not pass in the repo. Must have been a later add. Okay, we're getting closer. Okay, so something's happening with the directory walk. What I'll do is we'll pause and we can dig into troubleshooting a little bit more on the next call. But I do want to break these up a little. This is probably a little bit longer than I wanted to go. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the video recording here, but we'll pick back up on video 8, where we'll continue to work through this and then hopefully get our first commit up and running with the blueprints capability. So we'll be back here shortly.